So the ATF just changed their new rule on frames and receivers just days before it's set to take effect. GOA in their lawsuit is now arguing that the last minute changes to that final rule on frames and receivers requires that the court immediately halt the enforcement of that new rule until we figure out what the ATF has actually changed. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you agree that the ATF needs to be reined in, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also want to mention, if you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to actually pick up channel merch. I have this shirt available in 2 different colors and then 2 other designs as well. So if you're interested, you can find the merch down below. It's linked in the details section and the comment section as well. So like I said in the intro, Gun Owners of America just filed a response to a notice that the ATF issued just a couple days ago. That ATF notice is in regards to the new rule on frames and receivers, which is set to take effect midnight of tonight. So it takes effect tomorrow on Wednesday, and that is that whole new rule on frames and receivers. So this is something we've been anticipating for a while, and now it's finally on us, but the ATF decided to change some aspects of that new rule, and they did it just days before the new rule goes into effect. GOA filed a response in its Morehouse v. ATF lawsuit because yesterday the ATF published a last-minute notice of changes to its final rule on frames and receivers. This notice indicates that the ATF has made corrections to the new rule on frames and receivers because the complexity of the new rule, which has caused even the ATF to make numerous mistakes in regards to what the new rule actually does. Now, if you're not aware of what this lawsuit entails, this lawsuit is against the ATF because of their new rule on frames and receivers. This new rule by the ATF essentially is a restriction on the sale of 80%er kits. Under this new rule, 80%er kits are treated as actual firearms. This new rule went into the regulatory definition of a firearm and changed the definition through a web of references to include 80%ers into the definition of an actual firearm. Since these 80%er kits are considered to actually be firearms, they are now subject to serialization requirements and background checks as well. Under the new rule, the primary impact will be on gun stores and gun manufacturers who deal in these items. An FFL or gun store will now have to serialize 80%er kits that they have in their inventory when this rule goes into effect. On top of that serialization requirement, they will also have the responsibility of running background checks on individuals who purchase these items. So going forward, after midnight tonight, you will only be able to purchase an 80%er kit from a gun store if the item has a serial number and also only if a background check is run on you for that purchase. As for manufacturers of these items, they will be required to serialize all the kits that they currently have in their inventory or anything that they manufacture in the future. And also, one of the requirements under this new rule that the ATF is putting into effect is that there's the requirement that they will actually have to get FFL licenses. They will have to be FFL holders. So that is the general rundown of what's going on in this new final rule on frames and receivers, and that is why GOA is suing the ATF. Now, this notice that the ATF published in the Federal Registry admits that the final rule contained inconsistencies and created various sources of confusion, which the agency now hopes to have identified and fixed. However, they are doing this just a couple days before the new rule on frames and receivers goes into effect, which again is midnight tonight. And they did this without following the proper notice and comment requirements under the APA. The fact that the ATF is making changes to the new rule just days before it goes into effect shows how illegitimate they are as an agency and how ridiculous this new rule on frames and receivers actually is. The ATF spit out 360 pages of a mess of a rule trying to regulate something that they have no authority to even regulate under the Second Amendment. That mess of a rule has resulted in confusion even within the ATF as an agency itself. And this all has come to a head right now just days before this new rule goes into effect. In GOA's response to that notice, they state, "The changes to the final rule are described as corrections, yet the summary of the changes admits that the complexity of this rulemaking process has caused even the ATF to make numerous mistakes." ATF admits that the final rule contained inconsistencies and creates various sources of confusion, which the agency now hopes to have identified and fixed, of course, 2 days before the effective date of the voluminous rulemaking. Ironically, after repeatedly criticizing plaintiffs for some alleged delay in challenging the final rule, ATF has now waited until 2 days before the effective date to publish changes to its text. Plaintiffs have not had time to review these changes and their implications to determine whether they are in fact corrections. Certainly, the agency's last-minute changes provide the court no opportunity to have a full understanding of the final rule before the ruling of plaintiffs' motion seeking injunctive relief. It is important to note that the ATF waited 117 days from the date the final rule was published to notice these changes. They go on to state that significantly, as a purely technical matter, ATF has failed to publish the corrections not less than 30 days before its effective date, as required by the APA. To be sure, there are some exceptions to the notice and comment requirement when the agency for good cause finds that the notice and the public procedure thereon are impracticable, unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest. However, correcting errors did not fall within these exceptions. Therefore, the ATF did not claim that good cause exception in the corrections, nor did it provide any reasoning that would justify application of the good cause exception. So they're just saying there are some exceptions to that general rule of needing to post it for comment and notice 30 days before, but the exceptions do not fall for what the ATF is actually trying to do. The ATF is saying that they need corrections, but the good cause exception does not allow those types of excuses. It does not permit for corrections. So actually, as I was making this video, I started to get some texts, and some people said that we actually got the determination by the court on the request for a preliminary injunction or some sort of immediate relief as far as the implementation of the new rule on frames and receivers. So we got a determination from this judge in the Morehouse case. For those not aware, it's in North Dakota. And the essential determination is that he is not going to grant the preliminary injunction. So at least out of this case, there will be no grant for a preliminary injunction. The new rule on frames receivers will go into effect tonight, midnight. And then as far as the corrections to the final rule, which we're talking about in this video, he stated essentially that the court has independently reviewed the corrections and disagrees. Here, the corrections were issued before the final rule's effective date and are simply a correction of technical or clerical errors. Accordingly, as the court sees it, the corrections are a logical outgrowth of the proposed rule and do not trigger a new notice and comment period. Nevertheless, assuming that they would, that the plaintiffs are correct, and the corrections violate the notice and comment period of the APA, the plaintiffs have failed to cite any authority that this would lead to an invalidation of the entirety of the final rule. To the contrary, the cases cited by plaintiffs appear to support a finding at best only that the corrections would be invalidated. So he's saying that the changes as far as the corrections to the final rule that just happened a couple days ago wouldn't, in his eyes, warrant that the entirety of the new rule on frames receivers by the ATF be permanently enjoined or preliminary enjoined in this case. So as far as this case, there is not going to be an injunction granted by the court. The court has not granted that in this Morehouse case. So the new rule on frames and receivers will take effect midnight tonight. There are some other cases going where maybe something could happen in those. We're waiting to see. But as far as this case, the last minute corrections made by the ATF, the general rule on frames and receivers, and the unconstitutional aspect of it wasn't enough for this judge to say that, hey, we should enjoin the immediate impact of this case. So, you know, it's one of those unfortunate things. A lot of us anticipated that that was probably going to happen because still, even after Bruin, still after all these actions by the ATF, many judges, many courts still will not stop these types of actions. And it just seems, at least in this case, that's par for the course. One of the things that GOA can now do on the denial of the preliminary injunction, they can seek an appeal by the circuit court on that aspect. We see that happen in a lot of these cases. That's an interlocutory appeal. So there are still some avenues. Whether or not they're going to do that and seek an emergency stay or some sort of emergency injunction from a circuit court, that's yet to be seen. But I just want to get you guys this update because that was one of the things that maybe could stop the enforcement of this new rule on frames receivers from going into effect tomorrow, and the court did not grant that injunction. So if we get any more information, I will let you all know. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment down below, and I'll try to answer the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and like support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm or fuel Al Gore's rhythm. It adds fuel to his jet and signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. Again, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So again, thank you so much for all of your support. And as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.